The horrors of an IV cocaine addiction. I met Evil at my door. Evil smiled. We embraced and I invited him in. He was warm and comforting. His beauty filled me indescribable, and he showed up with the darkness. The following account of the nightmare, all-consuming in every way for 6 full months, is a single direct note written with an urgency unparalleled. This note, written in this manner, is the closest mere words could capture what could not be captured in any way other than experience itself. The experience completes a journey to the mindset which finally allowed the books to be written. Feeling myself dig my own grave with arms losing circulation and mobility, thinking of stepping out of the hole I dug, but watching, as diabetics do, the ends and then more of my toes and soon my feet, becoming more fit to be in a grave than to remain in the world of the living. Feeling discomfort and pain as I felt the anxiety of not knowing which choice I would make, a decision I knew was coming exponentially quicker and quicker with each coming day. Knowing it wasn't a future decision, but one which I would need to make in haste, I needed to put serious thought into taking the route of beginning a medical amputation, one toe at a time. Knowing there would be a moment I faced the situation and went to the emergency room to get it started, or I would have to take the second choice by taking matters into my own hands. The options, after neurotic and stressfully damaging to my brain to think so hard on, were both dreadful ideas. Knowing what I was debating, spending time concerned with it and how it got to that point, and knowing worse than that. Knowing the progression and the still more exponentially fast pace I could expect to accelerate. The devastation in all aspects of my physical existence. That second choice. I was almost for sure going to take that second choice. It was exactly my style. I had long passed the point where those thoughts weren't constantly on my radar. I had pondered enough on a ludicrous scenario which now played out as my daily life. And for long enough to have me make an actual effort to ponder on that unpleasantry, the specifics and the details had consumed my waking mind. For me to conclude that an axe, a flat metal sheet, a piece of wood to prop my foot, and a second of time where I would need to go beyond what I had come to see as a pivotal, no-turning-back moment, that was almost fully set in my mind. When it became time for me to pay the piper with my body, I had to be ready for atonement. My soul had long since been raped irreparably by itself and by its only recourse for any semblance of surviving in a shadowland of syringes. When bags of 100 needles arrived daily, sometimes twice a day, and where quantities of incoming cocaine, measured not in grams but in fractions of ounces, which were regimentally split, measured, and meticulously prepared, then administered and felt, and then pushed to where that edge is ridden like a surfer rides a huge swell, pushed to point break and daring that wave to wash me into oblivion. At any moment, one false swell would cause disaster before I knew what had even happened. A scale that weighed each dose to the 1,000th of a gram instead of the 100th because of such a thin margin of error. The phone timer, where the stopwatch was started like it was a race. The rating of each wave on a scale of 1 to 10, where a 7.5 was ideal, where any shot skirting on 8 became and remained scary, as the effects made me fully aware that I had passed into the danger zone, and I wasn't in control anymore. I was at the wave's mercy, and I fully knew it, and that scared me more. Being scared, as can be imagined, wasn't the calm I wanted to not push over the edge. Being scared just added more stress to an already critical mass heart and brain. It was an art to catch that moment as the wave disabled my steering when I was forced to lean into and accept the rest of the ride, and I had no idea where that wave was going. The fear remained real as the chance of going off the rails and into oblivion was more ominous than all else. And all of that, all those extreme and taxing stresses which took me on a ride which touched on insanity, it would invite me to see the shore become smaller as I washed out into the storm-churned waves. If I made it to the shore, that wave would wash back to sea, leaving me alone and dry on the beach, feeling like happiness washed back into the water without me. It left me not just ready to surf again, but desperately clambering to get back to that dark, choppy abyss, all within 45 or less minutes between injections. the highs, and even beyond those highs to where fear and immediacy and instant regret and hindsight and hope bargaining and fingers crossed as I knew I momentarily went above the top tier threshold of euphoria, and as the intensity red line in the next 2 minutes leveled off as that micro amount fell off to bring that relief, knowing it was going to allow me to be back in control again. And when I saw that routine, with the quantities of drugs going through the veins and the hundreds of needles being used so fast that a failure of a shipping company meant it would be hundreds of reuses of dull needles from that morning and the day before, and knowing that routine to that point in all aspects and planning, and the thousands spent weekly and the ounces acquired with the thousands, and knowing it was just my friend and me sequestered in that bedroom together, each with our assembly line style of works and equipment on our designated sides, where we rode that demon wave over and over into oblivion, and the 6 days a week every week, and the reused needles, and the many, many spots of entry, and the missed shots from collapsed veins or the arterial hits, and the lack of sleep, and the lack of nutrition, and subpar hydration, and damage from the drug and any mixed-in impurities, and anything from a non-sterile environment, and all which compounded from that. The days and nights blurred together as time lost all meaning, our isolation in a room as the world outside ceased to exist, and the time it took to hit when it was a challenge, and wanting to feel that pleasure but not being able to hit, and stressing and frustration and anticipation and urgency and annoyance, all bouncing off a compromised brain, and the knowledge that sooner and sooner would begin the necessary removal of my physical body parts, beginning with the second toe on my right foot, and knowing I'd do it myself. And the dismantling and decimation of my entire being would be done to me by my own hands, those same hands which gladly, still in that moment of decision, never failed to hit the one shot during each 45-minute timed increment, and almost always came in far closer to just a half hour between surfing each wave. And paralysis had always been one of my two biggest fears. I had always thought that if I lost the ability to move my body, I'd rather be dead. I was losing mobility at my own hands as that addiction progressed. I often contemplated that next leap directly into that first of my biggest fears. The moment self-preservation gave way to removal of pieces of me in the order I saw was needed, the order in which I thought I would preserve the shadow of my once whole self, in the self-imposed hell where I was the gatekeeper at every level, the mental omission, a glaring paradox into my utter stupidity. I was causing one of the two of my fears which I had vowed death before conceding relegation. I was fully aware. I kept course anyhow. Then, double nuts as that, I pondered the best way to begin the complete destruction of all I was as a human being, my reasoning being to preserve my existence, if possible, by doing ghoulish things to myself, things which each time would markedly downgrade a quality of life I'd been adamant forever that I would never even accept at an entry level. And then, that other of my two biggest fears rapidly began to close into my horror reality. The other, a fear which was more panic-inducing than losing use of my body. I was already so deep in the hole I dug, a hole which was to serve as my future grave absolutely and rapidly. I looked up sometimes. I thought I would climb and just follow the light I saw, and then I realized my worst fear was now also right in front of me. The light, that beacon toward which to climb, it began to dim and lose focus. When I was in the dark, my vision was drastically diminished. Blindness. I remember being so irrationally afraid of blindness as a child that I'd not be able to sleep for long time periods. That irrationality as a child had suddenly grown into legit reason-based fear as I stood in the grave that I'd dug for myself. That fear, like that fear of paralysis, never left me. That fear frightened me to my core. At any time, a number of either predisposed items or a number of consequential conditions and actions or a 1 in a billion random freak event could cause eyesight to no longer exist. The world known and moved in always. The world the only way I managed it. It could instantly become absolutely another thing in basically every conceivable way and aspect. affecting every bit of my everything, no longer permitting any view beyond those ever steeper and darker walls of my grave. Then, that second of my worst lifelong fears, the fear which scared me the most, the fear which shook me to my core, it entered on my radar and it approached at a rapid progression. I sat at a card table in hell as I looked into the eyes of what I feared most, averting my gaze in the times I knew I had nothing against my opponents, feeling a way I'd never before felt, knowing it was I who had called that card game. I had invited them, and as I feared them sitting not just in my universe but right there with me, winning bigger and bigger pots on each hand, I knew no bluffing could hide the weak cards in front of me. I watched the chips stack up in front of my fears. I saw my own chips dwindle to an amount no true poker player would sit down with at a table, and I willingly handed over more and more of my final reserves to those evil and darkness-filled adversaries as they were sitting there with me, piercing my wavering eyes with steady and sure gazes. I fully knew that every tiny aspect of the horror and unbelievable betrayal playing out at that card table in hell were all acts of a terrifying and slow death, one which I alone was doing to myself.